It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. He is no stranger to many of you. Dr. Ray Perryman is President and CEO of the Perryman Group, an economic research and analysis firm based in Waco, Texas. His firm has served the needs of more than 2,500 clients, including 2/3 of the Global 25 companies, over half of the Fortune 100 companies, the 12 largest technology firms in the world, 10 U.S. cabinet departments, and 9 largest firms in the U.S., the 6 largest energy companies operating in the U.S., and the 5 largest U.S. banking institutions. He has authored several books, over 400 academic papers, and more than 2,500 trade articles. He publishes an annual subscription forecasting service and monthly newsletter, writes a weekly anticipated column, syndicated column, anticipated as well, I look for it every week, and hosts a daily radio commentary with frequent appearances on National Public Radio. Among the many accolades in 2018, Dr. Perryman was named the most dynamic economic researcher in the United States by Global Business Insight, and in 2019 received the Chairman's Award for Lifetime Achievement in Economic Development from the International Economic Development Council, and was selected for the Go Global Award from the International Trade Council as the Outstanding Global Economic Analyst for his work on trade, energy, environment, and other international issues. He brings his years of experience as a researcher and analyst to examine the dynamic economic growth forecasted for the Port of Brownsville and the Rio Grande Valley. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ray Perryman.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and that's a great introduction. I like that. I wish my parents could have heard it. They're no longer with us, but my dad would have enjoyed it. My mother might have believed it, you know. So, but before I start, and I will tell you right now, I have a lot to say, so you're probably not getting out here at 1 o'clock unless you just want to leave, and I won't be offended if you do. But I have a lot to say. But before I say anything, I want to take about 30 seconds of personal privilege and say, my dear friend Senator Lucio here has served this area and this region for 48 years in bringing economic leadership, and that is an amazing record, and I just want to take just a moment to acknowledge that we've been friends for many of those years, and worked together on many initiatives, and it's always been a pleasure. He's a class act, and so I just wanted to say that before I said anything else. One award he didn't mention, and you shouldn't get up here and talk about yourself, but I can't help it. There's just one award I'm really proud of. About, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I grew up in a small rural town in East Texas, and their high school started a Distinguished Alumni Award, and they were kind enough to give it to me. And that really meant a lot to me, because that came from the people who were there when I grew up and that sort of thing. And I really appreciated that a lot. And I went back to where I grew up, and I spent a couple of days. My wife asked me what it was like growing up in a town that small, because she grew up in a bigger town. And I said, it was great. I loved it. Nobody locked their doors. Everybody had the run of the place. It was great. And she said, ride your bike anywhere? And she said, well, what were the challenges? And I said, I really can't think of anything. It was pretty great. And she said, oh, come on, there had to be some problems being in a town that small. And I thought about it a minute. I said, well, there was this one thing that bothered me. I said, we were so small that we had to take driver's education and sex education in the same car. And her response was, Ray, that makes perfect sense. You can't drive either. So I just want you to know the respect I get in some circles. But anyway, it is great to be with you. I always love any opportunity to come down to this area. I've spent a lot of time working on things in this area over the years, and look forward to many more going forward. Again, I want to talk about a number of things today, some of national and global significance, because there is a lot going on in the world right now. Maybe try to make a little bit of sense out of some of it for you. And then a lot of the great things that are going on here, and some of our challenges and opportunities for the future, because I think there's so much, and this is a very, very exciting situation. The port is a linchpin of a whole lot of things going on in this region and around the state, as Sergio's presentation made very clear. To start off with, I don't want to dwell on the pandemic, because I mean we've been through it. It's tough. We're sort of coming out of it now. There's some more threats out there, but I mean life's somewhat returned to normal. We can all be in this place together. I had to put on pants to talk to y'all. I mean, for the last 2 years that has not been a requirement, and that, but I like it. I enjoy that very much. And anyway, a couple of things I want to emphasize though, just to kind of give you that perspective, because our memories kind of lose these things over time. What was different about this than so many other things through an economic lens is how fast it happened and how different it was from what we normally see. Normally when we have a recession in this country, it's because we did something stupid. No, it is. It's not. We don't have a business cycle that gets tired. Economic growth doesn't die of old age or anything like that. But we create a mortgage bubble that's not sustainable. We go crazy over .com stocks. We forget about basic accounting rules. We go crazy over savings and loan syndications. I've just covered about the last 50 years of recessions right there. I mean, it's all when we do something that's kind of not too smart, okay? This was very different. This one was a force that hit us from the outside like a ton of bricks. And that was one thing that was different about it. So what that meant was the solutions were different. You couldn't appoint a task force of yahoos like me to figure out something we need to change and go fix it. That didn't work that way. This time we had to do something else. The other thing that was different about it was just how fast and how deep it was. If you remember back in 2008, we called that the Great Recession. It was the worst recession since the Great Depression. In that recession, we lost 9.4 million jobs in this country, 9.4 million over 14 months, which, 700,000 jobs a month. I mean, that's tough, okay? But think about that, 9.4 million, 14 months. This time we lost 23.5 million in 2 months, over 20 million in April of 2020 alone. So I mean, we just never seen anything fall that quickly. And then we started the comeback from there. The United States went down 14.7% in jobs, 23.5 million. We're still about 2.1 million jobs below where we were before. Okay, so we still haven't gotten back to even yet. Texas didn't fall quite as badly. We fell about 11.2%. And finally, in November of last year, after 19 months, we got back above where we were before. We missed 2 years of growth in the process, but we at least got back to where we're in a net positive situation. Brownsville? You went down about 11% also. You came back in 13 months to pass your prior level. I think that's one of the shortest times in the entire country. 13 months, you're now, go ahead, give yourselves a hand. Yeah. And if elected, no, I wouldn't dare do that. I've seen these guys suffer too much. I wouldn't dare do that. But anyway, it's amazing, and you're already up about 2.5%. Texas is only up about less than 1% so far in terms of growth. So you have really shown the resilience, and the port was a big part of that. And the statistics that you showed, Sergio, show us that. But this area has come back very well. As we look forward, going to the future in terms of just some basic numbers, we're looking for this area to see economic growth in output over the next 5 years of about 3.3%, employment growth about 2.1%. Both those numbers exceed what we expect for the country as a whole. With a lot of things are going on, a lot of things are exciting. What I want to do now that I don't want to dwell on the national economy, but there's so much going on right now. I want to focus on 4 things as quickly as I can that are going on in the country right now that are relevant to your area, but also things that the media is just reporting about all the time and everybody's worked up about them. And I want to try to cut through some of that and maybe give you a little more perspective. One of them is the supply chain. We're hearing a lot about that. One of them is inflation. That's somewhat related to the supply chain. We're seeing a whole lot about that. And another one is the situation in Ukraine and what's happening there. We don't know everything, obviously, at this point, but we know a few things. And I think it's going to change some things that ultimately will be to the benefit of this region. And then, and then finally, the workforce and what's going on there, because I know that's a very important issue. And I know your great educational institutions and workforce development groups are well represented here today. First of all, when we talk about the supply chain, think about it this way. The world economy is a $100 trillion engine. It's the biggest engine you can imagine. $100 trillion, it churns along. It's been churning along for 10 years, doing a few hiccups here and there, but usually doing pretty well. Need an oil change every now and then, but it's doing okay. Then all of a sudden you stop it. And I don't mean you tap on the brakes and ease it like you do at a stop sign. I mean you turn off the key, jump out, and let it run into a tree. Okay? And then you take a bunch of sledgehammers and just bang on it for a while. Just really mess it up good. And then you try to restart it after you've let it sit out in the elements for about 6 months, okay? And you try to restart it first, and you kind of get it started, but then, you don't kind of like what it's doing, or something else comes along, so you just let it run to another tree and do the same thing all over again. And then you try to restart it. It's not going to be smooth, and that's what we're seeing right now. You can't, this big engine we shut down, you can't automatically, immediately gear up everything. It takes a while to get the supply chains worked out. It takes a while to get deliveries. There was a period of time nothing could come in the port. It takes a while to get those things done. It takes a while to get the logistics worked out. And along the way, we had some other, the types of economic disruptions that normally we can deal with. They're bad. We can kind of roll with them if everything else is going well. But when something like this happens, they become really bad. Our freeze here in Texas was one of them. Because, people don't realize it, but 1 out of every $6 of international trade that the United States does, 1 out of every $6 originates and goes through a Texas port. So when you shut those ports down, you start, you can't automatically restart that into the freeze. Made things a little bit worse for the whole country, not just for here. Okay. Of all things, we had 3 big chip plants in the world making those chips for all the cars and washing machines and refrigerators and all that. One of them had a big fire. Now, we could roll with that if everything else was going fine, but when you layer that on top of everything of a pandemic, they all become exaggerated in their importance. It just makes it that much harder to get it back together. The good thing about it, if there's anything good about it, is once you create a problem like that in a market economy, at the same instant, you create the incentive to solve the problem, because there's good money in getting this thing working again. And consequently, people are doing things, additional shifts and hours at the facilities, things to recruit more people into the workforce to deliver things to step up manufacturing efficiencies and investments. All sorts of things are happening to solve this. But if I'd given this speech a month ago, I'd have said it's probably going to take another 5 or 6 months to get it done. I think we probably add another month or two to that with the situation in Ukraine, because once again, it interrupts the flow of goods and services. And when you have that, it makes it more difficult. But the bottom line is we're on a path to solve this problem. Now, that's half the problem that leads to inflation. Inflation is kind of an interesting thing. If you look at the old-fashioned, easy definition that you've probably heard somewhere along the way, they tell you inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. Okay? Well, the too few goods is a supply chain problem. We can't get stuff to where it needs to be. So we got that half taken care of. The other half is the too much money half. And here's what happened. During the pandemic, we had a lot of new federal dollars put out there, okay? Billions and billions of dollars, okay? Now, some of it was absolutely 100% necessary. There's no question. You had people suffering and families who were displaced and small businesses who were not receiving revenue. You need a bunch of that you needed, but you can't do it perfectly, because you can't knock on every door and say, okay, how much do you need? How much do you need? You have to make rules. And when you do, a bunch of people got money that, they probably didn't need. So they had a whole bunch of money sitting around. And then they were cooped up for a year. Now, if you found yourself in a situation where you've been cooped up for a year, can't get out and do anything, and you got a little extra money, and they say, okay, time's up, you can go out now. What are you going to do? You're going to run out and spend that money. And so that's what happened. And so we got a lot of people spending with excess money, spending money. In fact, it was weird during the pandemic. Employment went way down, output went way down, income went up. That never happens in economic numbers. When you have fewer people working, producing less output, they make more money. And that's because part of the income was these programs. And again, part of that was absolutely essential. I'm not criticizing it in any way, but it did create a lot of extra money. And so consequently, you had both things happening at once. Too much money chasing too few goods. Okay? Again, we're in the process of solving that. The pandemic the Ukraine makes it worse, because all of a sudden that's messed up the energy markets even more than they were messed up before, as we figure out what's going to happen with Russian oil, and the uncertainty that's in the markets right now creates some spikes in prices. And for the average person out there, you hear all these headlines, inflation's the worst in 40 years and all that kind of stuff, and statistically it is. But for the average person out there, when they think about inflation, they think about the price of gas. They're paying more for everything, but it's not flashing in front of them 10 or 15 or 20 times a day as they walk around and drive around. Everybody focuses on the price of gasoline because that's the big price we see. And we think there's a lot of inflation, the gas prices are going up, and not quite as much if they're not going up. That's how people look at the world. And so it seems like it's worse than it is, but it's bad. Okay? But the one thing I want to tell you about is this is not what we had 40 years ago, and in the 80s, in the end of the Carter administration, beginning of the Reagan administration. This is not what we had. What I said was, this is not what we had 40, 45 years ago. In case you didn't hear me, what I said was, this is not what we had 40 or 45 years ago. And I have a little bit of knowledge about that I probably don't deserve to have. But when I was a little bitty baby economist, working on my PhD at Rice, my dissertation was actually building a model of the Federal Reserve. You and I have had conversations about the Fed over the years. About the Federal Reserve, a model of how the global monetary system works. And 45, 50 years ago, that was a big deal because there weren't one on every street corner like there is now. Models were kind of a big deal. And so when Paul Volcker gets put in as chairman of the Fed and he's going to go fix inflation, I had the only game in town, so they had to bring me in. I was still in my 20s, and I got to go up there and be in the middle of all that. And so I can tell you from firsthand experience, what we're seeing now is not what we saw then. And for those of you who are old enough to remember it, I won't call any names, but I see a few of you who are old as I am. If you go back and think about it, if you walked in a bank or a savings and loan back in the late 70s, early 80s, and you wanted to open just a regular old savings account, we're not talking a CD or something like that where you got to pay 0.5% to get that money. We're not talking about that. Okay, we're talking about just going in and opening a savings account. You got 5% on your money. You can't get anything close to that today. You're not planning on raising them today to that, are you? Okay, I didn't think so. Yeah, I didn't think so. Anyway, when I have a banker in the audience, I have to mess around with them. It's territory. I keep telling them they need to go to this school and learn the word yes, but they won't listen to me. But anyway. What that meant was the basic cost of funds for financial institutions was 5%. That was like a floor on inflation. You couldn't hardly go below that because you got the cost of funds. And so and everything ratcheted up from there. We had a whole bunch of things in escalating clauses in contracts that were very different than they are now. 30-day escalation clauses in contracts, things like that. All that institutional stuff we got rid of. It was painful, had a big recession, but we got rid of it. And so consequently, we're not going through that again. So the structural situation is not the same. It is a difficulty. It's going to take a few months to work it out. But, the supply chain will get fixed, and people will spend all that extra money. And then we'll be left with the long-term situation. And the long-term situation is where it's going to probably play out is we did add a whole lot to the debt in the last couple of years, and it's already pretty big. And we added a whole lot to the debt. You saw the headlines for a week or so ago, it hit $30 trillion. I mean, we have a big federal debt. And the Federal Reserve is starting to increase interest rates, mess with their balance sheet, that sort of thing, to bring things kind of back into line. When they do that, you get a little bit more long-term inflation. Okay? But I'm talking going from our 1.5%, 2% we've seen for the last couple of years to 2 to 2.5%. Long term. So you will have a little bit more inflation because there is a price to pay. Because when all those bills were passed, we knew that we were adding a lot to the deficit. But frankly, I don't think we had a choice on some of that. It literally came down to your choices were a bad choice, let's blow up the deficit, or a catastrophic choice, let's kill a bunch of small businesses and let a bunch of people starve to death. Fortunately, we chose the bad choice. Okay, because there was not a good choice out there to be chosen. And so as a result of that, we're going to have a little more long-term inflation, nothing we can't manage, but the short-term situation is going to be difficult here. And again, coming back to the Ukraine, that makes it a little bit worse. Okay? Now, to add a little bit about the Ukraine, obviously it's fluid, we don't know what's going to happen. The human tragedy is what we should all be, and I think we all are focused on. I live out in Odessa. And we had a student exchange program with Odessa over in the Ukraine a number of years ago, and I had a young man spend 2 or 3 years living with me from the Ukraine, and I'm now trying to help his family work their way through this thing. And so for many people, it's a very, very personal sort of situation. But from an economic perspective over here, I think one thing that you're seeing is, I think it's giving people a wake-up call about American energy. And I think we need that. I think we need a wake-up call about American energy and where it's going to be in the future. We've got a study, it's not released, it'll be released fairly soon, but we've got a study that's coming out fairly soon that took a very, very deep dive on global energy demand. If you take the U.S. Department of Energy's forecast for future energy demand right now, you take their numbers, not somebody else's numbers, their numbers, okay? The same folks who tell you can't build a pipeline, you can't do this, you can't do that, and all that stuff. They are showing we need 31% more domestic oil and gas in the next 30 years to handle the growth in the world economy in their baseline forecast. Some of their other forecasts are more, a little bit less, but every forecast, they put out 5 forecasts. Every one of them shows we need more in 30 years than we have today. And that's with a huge growth in renewables, which we certainly need. And we certainly support, and your port plays a big role in that. That's like from 300 to 600% growth in renewables. I mean, we're talking about huge growth in renewables. You're still going to need a lot of natural gas because that emerging part of the world is growing. And the alternative to not letting it grow is letting 700 million people in the world, which is twice the population of the United States, continue to subsist on $1.90 a day or less. That's the alternative. So, and I think the Ukrainian situation has really brought that into focus because it's brought in the geopolitical part of it. I have to say, before you were there 10 years ago, I did tell the folks in Congress on the Energy Committee, I did tell them 10 years ago, if we could figure out how to, not if we could figure out, well, let's think about that. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way we could take natural gas and turn it into a liquid and ship it somewhere and then sell it to somebody else? Wouldn't that be nice with all the natural gas we got? Well, imagine that. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay. So anyway, and we actually did the permitting for Rio Grande many, many years ago. I hope to see that thing come to fruition fairly soon here. And I think there's a lot of things moving in the right direction for that to happen. But in any case, the bottom line is Russia's economy is smaller than Texas' economy. The source of Russia's economic power is that it controls the natural gas that heats Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And it gets very cold in the winter up there. That's the source of his economic power. You take that away, and he's another leader of another middle-sized country, okay, that has the same amount of influence on the world as every other leader of every middle-sized country. We have the capacity to do that. And people are now realizing it for the first time. We're actually shipping the stuff to Europe. Now, we don't have the scale and the volume yet to get all that done, okay? We need to work on that. If there was just a place that already had the permitting in place and kind of ready to go, and wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? And then we could get all that done. But my point is, I think the world's waking up to that realization right now, and so I wanted to bring that out as we kind of talk about this stuff. A few other things I want to talk about that I think affect the local economy that are very exciting. Some of you may have seen 3 or 4 weeks ago. We released a little study on the power of the space industry, okay, and what's going on with the space industry in the United States and Texas right now. If you want a copy of the study, it's on our website. You can go download it. It doesn't cost anything. But basically what we found was the space industry contributes about 100,000 jobs to Texas right now, about 1.7 million to the country. We're actually behind the country, which kind of surprised me since we've had NASA along and all that. We haven't kept up. But our growth in our space industry in Texas is 130% faster than the national growth. And we think by 2040 that 100,000 jobs is going to be 400,000 jobs. And we're not going to no longer be 6% of the space economy. We're going to be 15% of the space economy. And 80% of that growth is coming from the private sector. Man, I'd like to be in an area where somebody's made a big investment in the space industry, and they got several hundred, over 1,000 people working out there, and they keep building, adding on, and doing things. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be awesome? So that's another place where this area is really on the fulcrum and at the forefront of important things that are happening as we go forward in the economy. The other thing I want to talk about a minute is, the pandemic's going to have a lot of effects, and I'll probably close with some of the longer-term ones and that sort of thing. But one effect that it's having right now is a process we're calling reshoring to some extent. For a long time now, companies have been kind of focused on what is the quarterly report going to say, what's that going to do to our stock price, and what's that going to do to my bonus, okay? That's been the real focus for a long time, is short-term earnings. Over the past 10 years or so, there's been kind of a movement toward taking a bigger approach, the ESG movement, if some of you are familiar with environmental and social governance. But it's basically saying, let's look beyond the current quarter. Let's look at our long-term situation, the world we live in and its environment, the people and their amenities and that sort of thing, and building nice communities and all that. And one of the things they discovered was, if you're only focused on the current quarter, you tend to buy everything from the lowest bidder, okay? Which means we bought a whole lot of stuff we really, really, really need from China, from Malaysia, from South Korea, and a variety of other places. And we'll continue to, there's no question. But the message that came out very loud and clear was, when that stuff can't get in, we have a real problem. So maybe we need to have, we'll still buy the cheap stuff over there, but maybe we need to have a little bit of it manufactured over here too, okay? Wouldn't it be nice if you lived in a place that was really close to a country that had some very competitive global wages and very skilled manufacturing assembly capabilities to make that kind of stuff, and you had a port nearby that could get the stuff to them, and man, that'd be nice. That'd be really nice. Y'all think of a place like that? I'm old enough that I was involved in the initial putting together of NAFTA, and I was involved in the putting together of the last one. And I have to tell you, I was in Mexico City with a group trying to get that thing together. At the same time, we put tariffs on Canadian lumber. That was not a fun experience. You talk for 5 minutes and you scrape some Canadians off the ceiling. Then you talk for 5 more minutes and you scrape some more Canadians off the ceiling. It was kind of an interesting process. But anyway, we do have a trade agreement. We looked at the economic impact of having it versus not having a trade agreement with Mexico. It's worth about 600,000 jobs to this economy. Again, that study's on our website too if you want to go look at it. Download it, whatever. But if you sell it, I want a commission, But about 160,000 of those 600,000 jobs are in Texas because we have the long border with Mexico, we have the integration with Mexico, and a large portion of those are here in the Rio Grande Valley because it is a very symbiotic relationship, and it's no place more apparent than here with the steel and the refined petroleum products and the many other things that are going on there, all of which are destined to grow. We're looking at Mexico's growth this year somewhere in the 3% range, something like that. Again, pretty decent economic growth for Mexico over the next year or so. And then beyond that, there's a whole lot of potential. And what's happened with the pandemic helps to ignite that potential because it says to people, we really, really, really need to have some North American manufacturing taking place. And from a cost competitive standpoint and a skills and everything else that goes with that, northern Mexico is an ideal place to be the linchpin of a lot of that. And so I think that's really going to bode very well for this area. The other one, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it because I've already spent a whole lot of time on it, is energy. But I will say, the world is going to need more energy in the future of all types. Much, much, much more renewable. Much more. 300% to 600%, depending on what happens in the world. But also 25, 30, 40, 50, 60% more hydrocarbons, oil and gas. Okay? Texas, you may not know this, the oil fields in Texas, just because of the nature of the sulfur content and that sort of thing, have the lowest carbon footprint of any onshore oil facilities in the United States, or in the world for that matter. The cleanest oil you can get out of the ground is from Texas. We're learning a whole lot of things about how to burn it cleaner, how to capture the carbon, and all kinds of things. All that needs to continue to take place. But we are going to have, one thing I've learned in all my years with this stuff is people go off on, no offense to guys, you elect officials, but people go off on tangents in both directions sometimes in policy. You do. But the one thing that happens is, the one thing I've learned over a long time doing this and studying the history for centuries is, the one thing you can see about a market economy is when something has to happen, it will. Okay? I mean, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And we have no choice in the world but to figure out the best way to do energy, which includes massive renewable investments, but also includes cleaner, more efficient, more effective use of hydrocarbons. And that's where we are going to end up because that's where we have to end up. And with that comes a lot of opportunities to take for the infrastructure you have here for things like LNG facilities, which would be like an $8 to $10 billion private investment. Just one of them right here would be that. And that's you don't see those every day. That's a very big deal. And we've looked at them. They affect our trade balance positively. We did the permitting for the ones up in Corpus Christi, and the ones in Beaumont, and the ones in Louisiana, and the ones in Nova Scotia, and the ones in Alaska, and we've done them all over the place. And they have a significant impact on our trade balance. They bring a whole lot of benefits in addition to the massive investment that you see in an area. And so I think that one is very, very important as well. I'm probably past 1 o'clock already. Nope, I got 5 more minutes till 1 o'clock. I'm doing better than I thought I would. My kids say when I get geared up, I talk 350 words a minute, but have gusts to 600. So, that's kind of how it works. But I do have a couple of other things I want to spend a few minutes talking about here, and I do respect your time, and I know you're all busy people, business leaders, elected officials, and frankly, that's why I want to talk about this last thing I want to talk about. And that is the long-term future of the economy and what happens. We're very focused right now on the war in the Ukraine, and we should be. We're very focused on getting out of the pandemic, and we should be. We focus every day on some random something. I mean, Microsoft will miss its earnings prediction by a penny, and the stock market will drop 500 points. Do we seriously think that the present discounted value of the future of the American economy really drops 1 or 2% because Microsoft misses one projection by a penny? No. Or the consumer price index goes up a tenth more than yahoos like me predicted it would go up? No. Those things, in the grand scheme of things, at the end of the day, those are round-off error. They just don't matter. 3 things drive economies in the long term. One of them is technology. Okay? You've certainly seen that here, and all the investments that are taking place right now, and the space industry and what's going on with that, and so many other great industries, and we've been a leader here in Texas in that. The pandemic, if it's had any impact at all on technology, it's probably going to accelerate it because we've suddenly created more needs. We need more things about health. We need more things about safety. Whenever you create a need, again, with the market, you create the incentive to solve that need. After 9/11, all of a sudden, we got all kinds of things to get more secure more quickly. Better ways to get through airports, better ways to do all this stuff because all of a sudden, there was a market for it. The pandemics created those markets, particularly in the health area. And obviously, you have you have a medical school down here. You have a lot of great health resources down here that have been around here for many years. I've had the privilege of working with some of them over time. So that's one thing, technology. If anything, that's going to probably make the world economy grow a little faster than it would have otherwise. Another one is the cost and trade patterns. And the pandemic didn't change those too much. I mean, it's still cheaper to make stuff in China. It's still cheaper to make stuff in South Korea. But what it did do was make us take a little bit longer term view of things and realize, it's fine to if you buy all your stuff this quarter in one place, but if it's not available next quarter and you want to be here next year, you better have some alternatives out there. So if anything, the cost and trade thing didn't change much, but the attitude toward it did, and we're already seeing massive investments take place because of that. And I think you're going to see more of that. The third thing that drives economies, and most people think this is a boring subject, and I have to admit it is demographics. That has more to do with where economies go than anything else. Now, demographics is the science of how many people are born, how many people die, and whether we move, and how much we move around in between. That's really, it's not all that interesting, but when it comes to importance, there's nothing more important than demographics. And let's take a quick look at some demographics right now. What the last census told us was there are 1 million fewer young people in this country now than there were 10 years ago. 1 million fewer people under the age of 18. What does that tell you about the future workforce? Okay. It's starting to tell you something right now about that, okay? There were 440,000 more young people in Texas because we have a younger population. We have higher birth rates, that sort of thing. So literally the rest of the country lost like 1.4, almost 1.5 million, and we made up a third of it. That's a huge opportunity for the future. There's no question about that, okay? But it also creates a huge challenge. And again, this is not the most pleasant thing to end on, I guess, but it's you folks are in a position to move the needle and make things happen. And so I feel like I should talk about it for a couple of minutes. If you look in Texas right now, our projections are that 71% of the new jobs in the next 15, 20 years are going to require not necessarily a college degree, but some type of certification, skill level, something beyond just your routine high school diploma. Okay, you may get it in high school, you may get it in TSTC, you may get it at a community college or university. I mean, there's all kinds of places. You have great resources down here for all that. But the bottom line is, 71% of the jobs are going to require something more than your traditional high school diploma. The literacy rate in Texas right now is 40% for adults. Okay, so we better look to these kids. That's where we're going to find them, is these kids. We'll bring some people in. We've immigrated people in since we were a republic. But one interesting statistic I've always found with the census: almost 4 out of every 5 people who are raised in Texas end up in Texas. Okay, and we are we lead the country in that. So basically, the kids we raise now are our workforce of the future. Now let me go back to demographics for just a second. 2/3 of the kids in Texas come from families that all combined have 8% of the household wealth in Texas. Let that sink in for a minute. You got 2/3 of the kids, 67% or so of the kids, with 8% of the money. What does that say if they need a software package that might cost a couple $100. What does that say if they need a tutor or a summer enrichment program or a laptop or a broadband subscription or anything? It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. We have a real challenge on our hands to try to make that happen. It's essential that we do, but it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult to make that happen. And if you think about it another way, if you look at these kids, 20% of them in our schools today have a language barrier, language difficulty right now. This is the one that I've done a lot of work in this area. This is one that kind of rips me apart. If you walk into any two classrooms, I told you could leave. That's okay. If you walk into any two classrooms in this state randomly, out of the kids in those classrooms, one of those kids out of the two classrooms in the state of Texas is homeless. That's our world right now here. So it's imperative that we invest in education. In the last two sessions, a lot of progress has been made, Senator, and you know that. We still rank 41st in the country. We have a long way to go in that way. And we need to make sure we spend that money wisely and smartly, and in the ways that are going to help people learn in the new way of learning. It's kind of the way that some of us learned is probably not going to work too well when you have to relearn everything every 2 or 3 years. You got to have a whole different skill set and a whole different brainwave. That's why whenever I need something new done, I have to talk to my 9-year-old grandson. He'll take care of it for me. But anyway, I say all that, and I want to add one more demographic statistic to it. And this one came from a very, very reliable source. It came from the Perryman group. I mean, you can't get any better than that. Okay. No, we did a simulation of our model not long ago, and we said, what if the education system in Texas, elementary school, kindergarten, preschool, high school, college, medical school, law school, the whole nine, everything, graduate school, the whole 9 yards, what if our quality level and percentage of people we graduate stay exactly the same as it is right now? We don't get better, we don't get worse. We just stay the same as we are now by ethnic group and by socioeconomic group. And we just let demographics do what demographics are doing, that underlying thing there. If we don't improve this situation, 15 years from today, I'm not talking about way off in the future, 15 years from today, the average, not household, but person in the state of Texas, taking out inflation and all that stuff, will have $6,000 less in income. Family of three, $18,000 less in income on average than they have today. What does that say about that workforce we need to attract all this great new industry? It's going to be tough. What does it say about you guys trying to balance a budget when there's more needs? You won't be there. You're letting other guys handle that. But when you're trying to balance a budget, when you have less great new jobs coming into the state and more needs, you don't want Texas to be that. And so what that says to me is we have the greatest opportunity in the world. These young people are much more important to the future of Texas than these hydrocarbons. We don't have anything more important to the future of Texas than these kids that are in school right now, and we have to step up to the plate and do what we need to do to make sure they are ready to be the workforce of the future. If we do that, there's absolutely nothing that can then stop this great state. You are in a wonderful area of the state. I'm going to close very, very quickly because I'm a couple minutes past, but I want to tell one quick story because with that great introduction, I should end with a famous quote or something. But, I was raised in sticks in East Texas, so give me a break, okay? This won't be Shakespeare, okay? But I'm going to give you a quote from Orson Welles. Many of you remember he was a writer, actor, director. He did all kinds of stuff. He did Citizen Kane, which most people say was the greatest movie ever made. He did War of the Worlds on the radio and convinced my grandmother and a bunch of other folks that Martians had landed in New Jersey. But what I remember was late in his life, he died in the 80s, but late in his life, he did this commercial and it was a wonderful commercial because the budget was like $15,000 for this commercial, and people still remember it. I mean, the man died in the 80s. I spoke to a high school group a few months ago and asked if anybody knew this commercial. Over half of them did because it shows up on reruns on Nick at Night and stuff. I mean, people know this commercial. You probably can't remember all the commercials from the Super Bowl a couple of weeks ago, and they spent $1 bajillion on those. This is a cheap 10-second commercial. It was for Paul Masson wines. I already see the heads nodding. Yeah. She's already said it for me. Okay. He'd hold this glass of wine. He'd look at it, and I can't imitate his voice. He's a very deep, resonant voice. I can just talk a little bit slower. He would say, "At Paul Masson, we will sell no wine." Say, yep. Everybody remember, we will sell no wine before it's time. Well, think about that for a minute. Parmesan sells for $3.75 a gallon. Okay. And that's in a restaurant, you know. No, I got to tell you, man, they get that stuff in a bottle. It is time, you know. Yeah. I mean, Tuesday was a great year, I'm telling you. And I say that because that's where you are right now. Been through a lot of tough stuff, a lot of challenges, a lot of things going on. But you have the resources, you have the location, you have the assets, you have this great port in this region, you have emerging industries, you have great educational institutions, you have all the pieces in place, and you have young people. You have all the pieces in place for a really great future. So if there's ever any place, any time I could say with confidence, you have your stuff in a bottle, and it is time. Thank you all very much.